Hey sophomores, this is our vocab for Chapter 19, Islamic Gunpowder Empires. Our first word is the Bosphorus Strait. The Bosphorus Strait is a very thin body of water that basically connects in Turkey, Europe, and Asia. You can see right here it's this small little strait right here. Actually, the city of Istanbul is divided by this strait. It's on both sides of this strait. Here we can see a bigger picture of Turkey, and it separates the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. The reason why this is so important is because we have the Black Sea here, the Mediterranean Sea here, and if you get a look at a bigger picture of Europe, controlling the Bosphorus would allow you to have access to trade with all these lands up here in Eastern Europe, and all the way in the Mediterranean Sea, North Africa, which kind of puts the city of Istanbul in the middle of everything. Remember, this used to be Constantinople in the time period of the Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire as well. So the Bosphorus Strait basically connects kind of like Asia with Europe in Turkey, and it's very important for the city of Istanbul, especially with being run by the Ottoman Empire. The Ghazi ideal is basically an Arabic word that has to do with military expeditions or raiding. It is basically, these are soldiers who are used by empires like the Ottomans for their fighters, and they see that they are fighting for the good for mankind, and they are basically like Islamic warriors who are fighting for the good of mankind to push their religion. Very useful for Ottoman warriors for expanding and making their empire stronger. The Suleimani Mosque was built by the Ottoman Empire Suleiman, and it was one of the most impressive buildings, designs, and architecture of this era from 1450 to 1750. It's actually built at the same time as St. Peter's, right around the same area as St. Peter's or the Vatican in Rome. And with the Suleiman Mosque and St. Peter's, there was kind of a competition to see who could build a better structure of architecture in the world. And this is also a sign of Suleiman, who was basically ruling at the peak of the Ottoman Empire, and it's an absolutely huge, beautiful mosque in Istanbul. Ulema are a body of Muslim scholars who have a specialization and knowledge of Muslim and Islamic law. So these are a lot of the people who read and interpret what would be Sharia law, which is our next word. So let's go to our next word, which is Sharia law. And Sharia law is basically law that is based upon Islamic teachings in the Quran. So it's basically you take the Quran, you try to make a fair and just law system from using Sharia law. Europe during the Middle Ages often used the Bible as principles for their law, and at this time Islam uses Sharia as the basis for their laws as well. A harem. A harem in this time period, 1450 to 1750, was common with the Ottoman Empire and other empires. It is basically separate living facilities for the wives of a ruler, or concubines, which are basically just women whose job is to please the ruler, and female servants, a separate quarters for them to live. Actually, in the Ottoman Empire, many of the concubines and wives had a surprising amount of power and influence with rulers since they spent so much time with them. However, it's also a sign of inequality and definitely a sign of patriarchy that they are put in a subservient or servant position to the male. Miniature paintings. We're going to focus on the miniature paintings from the Ottoman Empire in this chapter. The miniature paintings were paintings that were very fine, small, and had a lot of detail in them, and they were basically used to tell an entire story. So you may have had something going all the way from the top to the bottom, where the top would be more further in the past, and the pictures near the bottom would be more recent events. And these miniature paintings could tell a story of a battle, it could tell a story of leaders, and these would be basically ways of telling stories to a mass number of people, and especially those who did not have the ability to read and write could still get the story from the painting at this time. So these weren't really huge, grand pieces of art. They were small ones that were basically made to communicate, to tell stories to people, or stories of history or legends. Sikhism, or Sikhism actually as it is called, is a religion that forms in India. It is a syncretized religion. It does take some elements of Hinduism and Islam in it. However, it is monotheistic, meaning that it believes in one God, and it's based on the teachings of a lot of gurus. Gurus are basically like great teachers that it follows. Sikhism grows during this era, becomes stronger, and becomes basically like the third biggest faith in the Indian subcontinent at this time, and it spreads. It has a huge emphasis on its holy book that is taught to people. The holy book is taken as being extremely important in Sikhism as well. Sati is a former practice that existed in India in this era, where a woman may throw herself onto her husband's funeral pyre. So basically, the husband would be burned, and in some cases, the woman would be expected to jump onto that fire, so she would die as well with her husband. Again, this is a former practice that doesn't really occur anymore, and again, it's another sign of patriarchy that existed at this time. The Taj Mahal is a brilliant piece of architecture that was designed by the Mughal ruler Shah Jahan. It was designed as a mausoleum for his wife who passed away. It's also a sign of the great power that the Mughal Empire had. They were able to build a structure that was so big and so impressive. Surprisingly enough, it was paid for with Spanish silver, which really shows like how much of the world was using the silver that originally came from Bolivia, from places like Potosi, and was used in trade in this time period. But again, it was built by the Emperor Shah Jahan for his wife, and is a symbol of the power of the Mughals that they had at this time. The Gunpowder Empires are the Ottoman, the Safavid, and the Mughal that we are studying in this chapter. They're called the Gunpowder Empires because these empires were able to effectively use gunpowder for cannons especially, but also for guns that would form during this time period, and they used these to gain power. So these were three Islamic gunpowder empires of this era. Samarkand was the capital of Tamerlan's empire. So Tamerlan, who is from modern-day Uzbekistan, was able to build a large empire in Central Asia with Samarkand as its capital, where the astronomy, literature was studied, and this is an empire that was right before our gunpowder empires. Topkapi Palace was built in the Ottoman Empire, and it is the palace where you had the Sultan of the Ottomans basically lived. His harem lived there as well. It was an extravagant, richly built, which showed the power of the Ottomans, and very similar to Versailles, which we had in France, and also the Winter Palace that we saw as well with the Russian Empire in St. Petersburg. Vienna is a city in modern-day Austria. This is an important city in this era because the Ottomans actually got all the way up to Vienna when they were taking their conquest into Europe. But they were defeated and had to retreat from Vienna because they were also fighting against the Safavids on the other side. And also when they went to Vienna to fight them, their cannons got stuck in the mud on the way there and they weren't able to use them. Had they had cannons, they may have won this war in Vienna, and if that had happened, it's very possible the Ottomans would have went further into Europe, which really could have changed a lot of our history if they had taken over large parts of Europe in this era. The Battle of Lepanto was a battle between the Holy League of the Venetian from Venice and Spanish navies against the Ottoman Empire. This is a very big turning point in history because the Venetians and the Spanish were able to defeat the Ottoman Empire. Had the Ottomans won, they could have had more advances into Europe and could have possibly even taken over more lands and gained more power. However, this will really symbolize the beginning of the end of the Ottoman Empire. However, the Ottoman Empire won't fully fall until World War I in the early 1900s. But this will be the beginning of the end, and we'll see a downfall of the Ottoman Empire because of this battle. The Safavid Empire was one of our gunpowder empires. It was located in the same area what we would call Persia, or Iran and Iraq today. It is a Shia Muslim empire. So this is they're in the minority in Islam, the Shia Muslims. They were the ones who believed that Muhammad's nephew should have been the next caliph or leader of Islam. And this really starts a rivalry with the Ottoman Empire, who are Sunni Muslims. And this becomes a rivalry between the two different branches of Islam, which actually continues to this day. So the Safavid Empire is also very important because they kind of kept the Ottoman Empire in check because they were fighting back and forth, which meant the Ottoman Empire couldn't make further advances into Europe and other places, which could have been possible at the time period. A Shah. What you really need to know is a Shah was the name of the ruler or the king in the Safavid Empire. Isfahan was the capital of the Safavid Empire at this time. It was a very large city, a beautiful city at this time, one of the most populous cities in the world at this point, and the center of the Safavid Empire. Also a center of Shia Islam. Delhi was a walled city built by Shah Jahan, and it was the capital of the Mughal Empire at this time. Today there's known as Old Delhi, the capital of the Mughal Empire, and New Delhi, which is a modern city in India. Middlemen just means people in the middle, people who are in the middle of two different people who want to trade. For trade purposes, middlemen can charge taxes and can bring goods back and forth. The Ottomans were middlemen in history. Many Europeans who wanted goods from China and other places had to go through the Ottoman Empire to get these goods, which is how the Ottoman made a lot of money, profits during their empire. Barbary pirates were pirates who basically worked they were mainly from North Africa, and they would rob ships all over the Mediterranean, even into the Black Sea, trying to make profits and make money off all the goods that were moving back and forth. The Grand Bazaar is a huge market that exists in Istanbul. It still exists to this day. It's literally, you can walk around there for hours and hours. It sells all kinds of goods. It was made during this time period, and it really is a symbol of all the trade that was done in the Ottoman Empire, especially in the capital of Istanbul. Devresheme were boys from Eastern Europe who were basically taken by the Ottoman Empire, and they were taken as slaves, and they were put into military training where they were taught to become some of the top soldiers in the Ottoman Empire. Well, yes, it was slavery and they weren't free. Actually, many of them were able to move up in society and actually become leaders in the Ottoman Empire. However, they were taken away from their family, away from their culture, and put into a new Ottoman Empire. That is Devresheme. Janissaries were elite fighters in the Ottoman Empire. Many Devresheme would become Janissaries, some of the top fighters. They formed their own branches of the military and were some of the reasons why Ottoman's military was so strong. However, many of them became independent and more rebellious and actually became a problem as the Ottoman Empire began to crumble and fall later on. Zamindars were rich landowners in the Mughal Empire. These were landowners who owned huge plots of land where many peasants would work for them. It was very similar to feudalism that existed both in Europe and Japan from the previous era. The caste system. You would be born into a caste, which would be the job that you would have for life. And that would also be the people you would be around, the people who you could marry, would all be in your caste. This was part of Hinduism, and the belief was when you died, you would be reincarnated, and you could either raise up a level in the caste, or you could go down a level until eventually you got to be a Brahmin, and eventually would be out of the caste system completely in Hinduism.